Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Niels Pedersen. I'm a senior lecturer here at MMU, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this very insightful and exciting webcast on cyber ethics in digital advancements. Today's webcast is held jointly by the Chartered Banker Institute, Manchester Metropolitan University, and the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. Now, we have a distinguished panel, which includes Professor Paul Smith from Manchester Metropolitan University. He's an expert in technology-enabled process transformation across various industries, and he serves as a board advisor for multiple large organizations, including the Gambling Commission. We have Bani Lamba. She is a data analytics and tech manager who delivers content for ICAW members focused on advancing analytics and technology within the finance profession and addressing key technology-related topics. She has experience in managing and deploying specialized tools for auditors. Bani, I wish you'd been around 15 years ago when I was an auditor. We used to do things by pen and paper and Excel. So certainly we could have done with more AI-enabled tools back then. And we have Jamie Crossman-Smith. He is the managing director of Grant Thornton UK. He has over 15 years experience in the professional services with a focus on financial institutions, and he leads the National Digital Centre of Excellence, where he supports all UK service lines in developing digital service offerings from analytics to AI and automation. Now, in today's session, we aim to discuss the complex and intricate landscape of cyber ethics, and we'll explore the various ethical dilemmas posed by various emerging technologies, including AI. And we hope to provide guidance and steer, and hopefully this discussion can foster responsible innovation. Now, whether you're joining us live or you're catching up on YouTube or watching this recording on the Chartered Banker Institute website, we sincerely hope you enjoy it. And if you do, please share it with your friends. Now, if you're part of the audience, we do encourage you to ask questions. There will be a Q&A session at in the latter half of this hour. So please, if you have questions as we go, pop them in the chat and we will address them in about 40 minutes or so. Now, let's commence the discussion. I'd like to start with you, Bani, and ask you about the various ways that AI might be applied in professional services and how those uses of AI how they lead to various ethical issues.
Thanks, Niels. It's great to be here. I guess one of the things that I want to highlight in professional services is AI is already being used for fraud detection, anomaly detection, but also in the financial services, it might be used to make decisions on loans and lending. So I think one of the key ethical dilemmas that we might come across is bias. So obviously the AI tools will be using data and generating output. So there may be bias in the decisions that are made by the AI models. So bias is a key one, but also accountability. So when those AI-made models are making those decisions and outputs, who is ultimately accountable for those decisions?
Okay, that's interesting. You know, in relation to bias and accountability and perhaps governance and oversight. So I'd like to ask Paul, perhaps as a follow-up question, what can be done, or what are the issues in relation to exercising oversight and governance within financial institutions, or more broadly, corporations, big businesses, over technology and AI. I think you're on mute, Paul.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Niels. I'd like to answer that by just putting a few other things on the table first. I'm sure we all know that there's a difference between ethics and morals. So ethics is institutional, organizational approaches to a set of moral imperatives that can be agreed on by that group. So it could be a code of conduct, it could be a general set of principles, and it involves some compromise and some decision making. You know, different people might have different moral opinions about AI, but you have to find this level playing field. So you have to focus on what's important and what's important to the business and to the people in the business. Going back to the original question that Bani answered, there are many different ways in which you can engage with AI and use it in a business. And I think it really determines the nature of the ethical imperative in your decision making to sort of categorize those different ways in which AI can be used. If you're buying a third-party app that is driven by AI, but you're not using your own data in it, you didn't design or train the model, then what you're really going to look at is, what is their ethical approach? Have they covered the ethical issues that you're really concerned about? And then the nature of that app might be more or less important from an ethical point of view in terms of its application. So if you've got an app that's looking at HR and recruitment, and it's a third-party app, when you're selecting it, you're probably going to be very concerned about bias in recruitment because it has serious repercussions for you and even legal implications if you are excluding certain key groups from an opportunity to work for you. But you're talking about a very different set of ethical issues if you're using a general tool like a Copilot or similar, which is Microsoft's tool powered by ChatGPT, to encourage your staff to just use the office environment a little bit better or to enhance search. There, the ethical imperatives are about the care and the honesty with which results are used by employees, and a general sense of whether or not it's an ethical tool or it has ethical consideration built into it in a way that's right for your business. And we can go all the way down the spectrum to we're building our own tools on our own data and training them. Then you have the full gamut of ethical issues to think about. And this is probably a much longer answer to the question than you were banking for, but I think I'll pause for breath there.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is it's very context dependent. So it depends whether it's a third-party app, what you're using it for, whether it's or internal. Perhaps a little change of gear. I'd like to focus on the financial sector. So I know Benny mentioned the loans and data, but perhaps in regard to emerging technologies more generally, what are the key risks within the financial sector? And I'm asking you, Jamie.
I think the key risks, thanks, Niels, and it's nice to see everybody today. I think the key risks that we need to consider for AI are the same key risks in a way, in the same things that are happening across the board with all technologies and all new things. It's moving so fast. It is moving so fast that the understanding and the regulation isn't quite there yet. And there's always, understandably, and in a way, so there should be, the willingness to jump in and have a go and make outcomes better for our customers, etc. But without that safety framework behind it, there are things that will happen and it will make it a bumpy journey. So let's think about in the financial sector where this could, really start to come a cropper for organizations. Well, AI has been used, limited AI has been used in some extent in credit scoring for a long time. I expect the growth of that to continue. But in credit scoring, the results you get out the back of it will only be as good as the data you put in the front of it to train it. And if you've got biased data that you don't really understand, then you're going to have a real problem, because, as Paul said, it's going to eventually come to outcomes that are potentially illegal. One of the main issues as well, as I said before, is that people don't really understand this right now, and there isn't actually a framework to help people understand it. Nothing that's on the front of my mind anyway that allows people to understand, I've got a model. It's essentially a load of maths, but the difference is I'm going to have to pick the data that goes into it to train that model. And that data that we train it on, it's going to pick up some patterns in there that I might not fully understand. And it's going to use those patterns to predict future values and to predict outcomes for customers potentially, and they might be bad. We've got to get that out as a country. We've got to get that out in the open. We've got to get it written down, and we've got to get everybody behind it and understand the true risks behind that life cycle.
Thank you, Jamie. Now, I want to go back to Bani, because Jamie mentioned the importance of understanding. And we all know that technology is very complex. You know, you go under the bonnet, it's a bunch of code or mathematics. So I'd like to learn more about, well, what is the role for leaders in industry and within organizations? But also more generally, everyone, you know, middle management, frontline staff, back office. Where do the various, if you like, parties sit? What is their role in addressing the risks of technology?
So I guess there's lots of different parts there, I think, especially for the leadership. One of the key things that I think I'd like to point out is that maybe large organizations may want to have like a board, like an ethics board that would draw on a range of experience in order to make sure that the leadership, but also the firm is focused on understanding technology. And I think education and training is also really important. It's important to make users aware of biases and different issues, but also it's also important that everyone across the firm is aware of data integrity. So like Jamie mentioned that AI models are using data to make decisions. So it's really important that everyone across the firm is aware of data integrity and how that can cause issues. And AI skills can, across the firm, may be really specialized and technical, but also can also be general, which would apply to the wider firm. So it's really important that we have those that are technically trained and specialized in the firm, but also that the general firm, the wider firm, has those general skills. And I think that falls onto the leaders of those firms to make sure that the education and training is there. I also think there needs to be a governance framework or an accountability framework. So there needs to be some sort of establishment of the AI risk a firm is willing to take, and then have those risk management frameworks and policies in place. And in terms of accountability, it shouldn't just fall on those that have the specialized knowledge or technicalities who are developing the models or in charge of adopting and deploying the tools, but rather everyone who's involved in using them.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
So when you mentioned an ethics board, I suppose the parallel that sprung to mind was, as I understand it, in Germany, they have actually two boards, one that represents the shareholders and one that represents the employees due to their labor laws. So I wonder whether there is, you know, within the tech sector, a space to have a regular board and then a board that is concerned with managing the technological risks I wonder, what do you think about that, Paul?
I think it's more likely to be, if I'm honest, a subset of the board, so an ethical group or committee or team that reports to the main board, and people would go on to that, based on their expertise and their ability to make these kinds of decisions. And then that group should call upon employees within the organization at different levels to make a contribution, to thinking through some of these problems and issues. And, it may be, as all things are, very contextual, the kinds of things that they may look at. So it may be a different group of people with different expertise looking at different procurement options for, a full solution bought that's enabled by AI. And that might be looking at the way in which that AI tool was trained and what data was used for that. It may be a very different set of people if you're building your own AI tools, or you're just thinking about general policy. So sadly, most things are contingent and contextual. And so you'd have a group that co-ops people to bring the expertise that's needed into the organization. I mean, I can speak, because it's a matter of public record, to what I do on the Gambling Commission. So the Gambling Commission has a board and it has advisory panels, and it brings people into specific advisory panels for specific issues. So I'm on a panel that looks at data and AI and its application, both in the industry and by the regulator as a regulator. And what they've done is they've brought in different levels of expertise into a group, and then a board subcommittee works with that group to understand how to manage things optimally.
Thank you. I mean, that sounds like maybe I don't want to use the word reasonable, but perhaps more proximate approach. So having subcommittees, like we have an audit committee, a risk committee, and so on. So perhaps the future looks like having a technology risk committee. I'd like to perhaps ask generally. That sounds like it requires a lot of skills, a lot of expertise, like a degree in physics or maths or something like that, to effectively oversee, let's say, an AI-based application. So I wonder, what are the challenges to acquiring those skills? How do we actually find enough people who can, effectively oversee an AI-based model and do so independently?
Well, thanks, Niels. I'm gonna jump on. I'm gonna answer that question in two bits. I don't agree. I think good management can manage anything that comes their way. There is my manager once said to a previous manager of mine once said to me, as a leader, all you need to be able to do is smell where it's going wrong. And there's an element of truth to that. So there will be always new things that come in. What a good leader in an organization does at the very top levels is it understands their staff and their people. It understands, they understand their customer and what they want, and they understand things that will break their organization. And AI fits into all those buckets. So what would be helpful, though, is a sheep dip or an immersion for boards so they get the general principles of what it means. Because when I go out and speak to clients on a day-to-day basis, bless them, half of them think Robocop's about to come and take them all away. And it's just not true. So we need a common sense view, calm down about the hype. What is this? What is the reality of all of this? But I don't think we need specialists at a senior level to help run a company, for example. I think good, capable managers have proved how they can get to those leadership positions are all we need.
Okay, thank you. I wonder, as a follow-up question, you said, there's no Robocop coming around the corner to get us. But what are the more pertinent or proximate risks of a, let's say, widespread application of increasingly powerful AI in your view?
I think leaders, they need to understand their customers and what they want. So when I speak to people on a day-to-day basis, AI isn't something that people go meh about. It's something they either are curious about and excited about, don't understand it, or they're scared of it. There's very little middle ground.
Mm.
And for that, what a good leader has got to be able to do is a good leader has got to be able to say, right, I know what my customer wants. Is this too much for them? I know what my people want. How much of a change is this for my organization? Can my organization handle this? Or am I going too fast for my organization? And the main concern that everybody should have right now is the fear that people have that they're going to lose their jobs over this. I think it's slightly unfounded. I think it's understandable, definitely understandable, because there's big changes coming. But I think leaders need to address those fears, because that's a risk to the organization as well. That's a significant risk to the organization.
Thank you. Benny, on this topic of fear within the profession, so perhaps not at a board level, but more of a professional level, mid-career professionals, early career professionals, what kind of things are ICAW members, and more broadly, perhaps practitioners and auditors, saying to you about the impact on their roles of AI going forward?
I think, like Jamie mentioned, I think I guess we need to think of AI as a tool rather than a replacement. So I think there needs to be a bit of a management of expectations. I know there's been a lot in the news and popular media that AI will replace everyone and everything. And we've heard that quite a lot about accountants. But rather than thinking of AI as a replacement, I think we need to think of it as a tool. And I think that critical thinking and judgment that professionals bring into their work will still be needed. So I think that should be the focus. And also in terms of what professionals have been saying, I think our focus has been on training and upskilling. So I think professionals have come up to us to ask us for more information on AI and how they can upskill. And I think that's what we have been trying to focus on as well. How can we help accountants and auditors or finance professionals to learn more about the technology so that they can use it in their day-to-day, but also as they see the technology being adopted into their organizations, they don't feel like they're falling behind, but that they can also move forward with that.
Okay, so what I hear, it's about upskilling, it's about being flexible. Perhaps there's an onus on all of us to be more flexible than we were in the past. What I'd like to zoom out a bit and think, okay, we've talked about board governance, the profession, the financial industry. What about the wider societal impacts of technology generally reshaping the way we do things, but also increasingly powerful AI? What do we think I'd like to ask all of you this question, but I'll start with Paul. What do we think like in the next couple of years, what do we see happening on a greater societal level?
Yeah, these are difficult questions to answer in some ways, but I give you my cut on it. In the last few days, we saw the launch of GPT-4o for omnichannel. I don't know who's seen any of that, but it shows you the way in which we're very rapidly moving towards a real AI assistant who can know you, know what's going on your devices, ride along with you as you're on a video call or as you're doing a piece of work on your computer, and take over material amounts of task and effort as you go. Anybody who watches the videos in that launch will understand exactly what I'm saying here. So I think within 2 years, AI will be ubiquitous and will be in use in every office in the UK and the US and around the world. It will just be a basic tool like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. In fact, it'll be embedded to both of those things and be helping you with everything you do. And it will make people much more comfortable and confident about the concept and where it might go in that kind of application, in that day-to-day commonplace aspect of it. It will redesign jobs quite dramatically. People will be nudged towards doing more productive and higher intellectual or creative work, but it won't displace everything. I mean, some of the fears you were just alluding to before about job losses, they come from works from a few years ago by people like Osborne and Frey, who did a study of the possibility of disruption that comes from AI by, dissecting, if you like, every job in a gigantic directory of job roles and attributes and skills and knowledge and training that goes with those roles, and working out which things are likely to be affected by AI and which aren't. And they come up with an overall chance of a job being transformed, not a job being lost. And accountants were, I think from memory, 97% likely to be subject to significant transformation in that paper. But it didn't mean there wouldn't be any accountants. It just meant they would be doing very different things. Now, there is room for efficiency. There may be less people needed in a whole range of different professions, but there'll be new professions that come with it as well. And there will be a greater need to get more comfortable with the technical aspects of training, designing, or using tools. And I don't mean it's all about math. I don't think it is at all. I think it's more about, are you really skilled in how to use prompting, for example, to ask questions of AI? Do you really understand how to make good choices in which tool you use for which task? How can you combine human creativity with aspects of the tools to get the best possible result, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a higher order and a different type of work and skill set, and new job roles that come from that. I think there will also be a slight expansion in some sort of data science and some significantly technical roles that, come with developing and using AI, particularly in apps. What I think is, we're not going to be in any business trying to write our own AI. We're just going to be constantly faced with brand new, rapidly evolving apps to select from. And we'll opt in and out of ecosystems and, stop using one AI app and start using another one because it's got an edge on the last one. And all of the investment and effort and excitement will switch to rapidly evolving use cases and matching apps to, better deliver against those use cases. That's how I see it evolving in the future.
So I have some personal experience with this. I have a friend who I used to work with who was a graphic designer and who's been working with, for 25 years with Photoshop. And he told me he could do a piece of artwork which would take days in 45 minutes now. But I suppose the catch-22 here is, because he'd worked so many years honing his craft, he was able to tell the AI what to do and make those decisions. So I wonder if we have a whole generation of people who don't put in the hard yards. Do we lose some skills, or some ability to make those very, what you might call artisanal or very high complex decisions that really rely on lots and lots of grunt work?
I still think that sort of in-depth ability, be it creative or be it in any discipline, is needed for some people, because how can you take a value add to AI role and have the finesse and the understanding to gap fill and to bring additional human expertise or creativity to top up what can be done in AI if you haven't put in the hard yards to learn some of this stuff? I mean, I hesitate to say this, but it's a little bit like there's an analogy with a university. You know, some people might say that the current university experience of 50% of all people going to university in a given country like the UK will soon be a thing of the past. That doesn't mean to say there won't be a university and there won't be people doing in-depth, complex study on a whole range of subjects. But for a large proportion of people, it will be enough to be trained by AI, remote from any physical institution in the things they're interested in. But for those who aspire to have a career and play a meaningful role in a whole set of different disciplines, they still are going to go and need to work their way through to become an expert. What they get taught might be different. They might learn how to understand all sorts of issues around copyright and so on in art and imagery. They might learn about prompting. They might be educated about tool choice, but they're still going to have to learn about being a graphic designer or about being an artist to some degree in the old-fashioned way as well. I just think there'll be less people who go through that slog potentially in the future. But it really is a matter of speculation and opinion, all of this, but that's how I would guess it would go.
As always, time, well, I can't quite remember the quote, but I think it's something like time makes fools of us all, and that it's extremely hard to predict the future beyond, let's say, the next 6 months.
Well, the way things are going, it's incredibly difficult. Yeah, I'd agree, Niels. I could have thrown in another example.
Of course.
Just to allay fears. I mean, one of the things that was shown on the GPT-4o videos that came out, as I say, a couple of days ago, was live translation. So you had one person speaking in Italian and one speaking in English. And live, they asked, ChatGPT essentially, can you follow along this conversation and act as a translator, please? When someone speaks in English, can you convert that to Italian and vice versa, and do that unprompted from now on? And then suddenly ChatGPT acted as a translator. What they were trying to demonstrate was performance improvements in the latest version of ChatGPT. You know, it's at least 100% faster in everything it does, but it feels more responsive than that now, and it's practical to start doing this kind of thing. However, I had a chat with a couple of people who are translators, and they pointed out, and they're quite right, that it still doesn't work if there's any kind of noise in the system. So if it's a very strong regional accent, or it's someone who is, let's say, speaking French, but they're from the African continent, and they have sort of changed the diction of that language. You know, it's harder to hear some of the words. There are occasional errors in use of the words. There's no way that machine learning or large language models can actually cope with it and deal with that well, but a translator can. A translator can interpolate and get used to the accent and can still function really well. So that it's about degrees of finesse and how far things will go. But there'll only be a certain amount of disruption, not 100% disruption in many cases.
Well, it sounds to me, you gave the example of translation, but perhaps more simple, we have the, transcription. And we have had transcription software for many years now, but to this day, watch a video and someone speaking normal English, and there will be errors, and so I wonder, and this is perhaps this is for you, Benny. I wonder, like, does AI really just kind of make everything conform to an average? And is that actually good for society? Because as we know that things invariably fall outside the norm. Paul, you mentioned that people speaking in different languages and with different regional imprints. So I wonder, Benny, like, what's your perspective on that?
That's a good question. I think in terms of generative AI, for example, I think we need to, I guess, always remember that it's the way the models work is based on probability rather than the correct definite answer. So yeah, I guess it's not really there to provide us the right and the most accurate answer. So the answer that we get could be quite uncertain. So I think in terms of the average that you say, I think what's also really important is to establish a range of confidence. So how confident are we in the output? And then also, because of that, I think human review and some sort of human oversight will always be important, I think.
Thank you. I think that's a great point, this idea of confidence, right? So I would say, for example, on a very basic level, I have a greater confidence in reading the Encyclopedia Britannica than Wikipedia. And so I was going to, go over to you, Jamie, about this idea of, well, how do we create human beings and organizations that learn to discern the outputs of the AI? But please, Jamie.
How do you mean learn to discern the outputs of the AI?
Well, so you prompt it, and okay, it's great, it comes out like that, but how do we ascertain that it's factually correct?
Right, okay. Well, it's a good question, and it's critical thinking skills. It's exactly what universities are very good at teaching. It's critical thinking skills. What are we going to do in a world where the answers for everything are available like that? How is that going to change the value proposition in everything that we do? It's going to be huge. What is going to be the differentiator is not the knowledge, the experience. And that goes back to that translation point, for example. The translation point that Paul made was a really good one. I can translate something, but the experience of having done it live and with, in real terms makes a huge difference. We only have to look back to, and I think there should be more studies done to look back to the Industrial Revolution, because the main blocker for AI, rampaging across our society is going to be us, right? It's going to be our appetite for change. We may have apps that can, wash your dishes, clean your house, iron your shirts, take your kids to school. Are we going to want that, though, as a society? Are we going to pay for it? Are we going to buy it? I don't know. And so, as Professor Yong Hong Peng from ManMet said to me, and he made an exactly the right comment. We know what the technology roadmap is for the next so many years. We know what's going to come out. Chat 4.40 was not a surprise, for example. What will be a surprise is how society reacts to that. That's going to be the interesting bit.
So the big unpredictable question is the human element. Paul, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with what Jamie said. And, the more cynical view is that there aren't very many limits on where AI could go, other than two things, actually. One, Jamie's very rightly said, what's our appetite? Do we regulate against it? What constraints do we put on it? Some of those constraints being for ethical reasons, obviously. But there's another one, which is economics. So let's extrapolate from my example about translation and interpretation, or interpreters of language. If you wanted to solve that problem, you could. And the way it would work is you would fine-tune an app for people with an African French accent, an African and French terminology, and you would supplement and design something tailored very specifically for that purpose and that market. But people will only do that if it makes economic sense and there's a financial return for it. So the question is it cheaper to keep using occasionally a human interpreter to do the job than it is to sort of be charged a specific premium fee for a language translation app? And it does come down to averages. How much do you need to bundle into your AI app on real-time translation versus, when does it stop being economically sensible and viable to do it? So there'll always be niche corners and areas where the economics stop it happening, even if regulation has no concern about it. I just want to put that on the table as another factor.
I think that that's a very good point you make on the difference between what is desirable and what is economically viable. They don't always overlap. I think Hayek made that point. And so I think that, we can list, perhaps we can make a much longer list of all the problems that AI could address, but then there are the problems that will get addressed based on what is economically viable. Now, before we go into the Q&A, Bani, would you like to have the final word on this? What do you think? What can AI do? What role do we as humans have to play in making AI, shall we say, have a net positive impact on the industry, the financial sector, and more broadly, the world?
I thought that's quite a big question. In terms of the things that we've been discussing today, in terms of the ethical considerations, for example, I know we've talked about, how can we make an AI system fair and unbiased? I personally think that in terms of those ethical issues, the technology itself may not ever be completely unbiased or totally fair. But as humans, I think that's where our skills are important. That's where the leaders in finance organizations are important to make sure that the controls are in place so that those ethical risks can be mitigated and so that we can take those into account. So I think in terms of our role as humans, I think it's important to monitor and have the oversight there. So yeah.
Thank you. So it sounds to me like a lot of the advances we're getting in AI now is certainly in generative AI. The AI doing things that humans previously only could do. So in other words, pretending to be humans. And I suppose there'll always be that gap for actually being a human, or at least that is my hope. Okay, thank you for answering all the questions. Now we do have a few questions from the audience. So we have 3. And this is a general one, and perhaps all of you could give an idea. So the question is, how can professionals stay informed and up to date on the evolving landscape of cyber ethics? Or let's rephrase it, how do you stay up to date?
Right, I don't mind going first. Listen, the first thing is to be inquisitive on that topic. A trite answer might be use some of these AI tools. So, install Copilot as an app and search using ChatGPT-4 and get up-to-date references to ethics. You'll find that works really well. Use the Google equivalent, the old Bard system as well, to do a search. Look to regulators and look to the Turing Institute. They talk about it a lot. Listen to podcasts like the All In podcast or Lex's podcast. There's a few very high quality podcasts that talk about AI, machine learning and ethics. That'd be the kind of hints I'd give.
Thank you, Paul. Jamie?
I can't really add much to what Paul has said, except this is a very, very fast moving landscape. So you've really got to take in a wide variety of opinions and knowledge and experiences. You know, traditionally, when you want to try and learn something, for example, and get up to speed, you may go and take a course. You know, we are in a world where that course might be outdated in 2 or 3 years' time. So just keep your ears and eyes open, listen, be curious, go to seminars, go to events, read what you can, etc.
Benny?
Yeah, I agree. I think keeping on top of regulation is quite important. So obviously the technology is developing and moving quite quickly. So regulation will probably move along with this as well. So it's important to keep up to date with that. At the Institute as well, we've been doing a lot of work on this. So we do have a generative AI guide, which we've been updating as we go along with case studies, for example. But yeah, as mentioned, just keeping on top of news, doing, I guess, looking at courses and trying to build skills there. I think all of that's important.
Thank you. Your hand is up, Jamie.
I do. I forgot the shameless plug about the project Manchester Metropolitan University and Grant Thornton have been working on together for the UK government. We've written a risk assessment on this on the cyber risks to AI, and that's now available on UK Gov. Thank
you. I suppose that sets up nicely my 2 cents on this issue, and that would be, I think Barney and perhaps also Paul mentioned regulators, government bodies. They do actually publish, whether they're in the UK or the US or elsewhere, or something like the Bank of International Settlements. If you look for them, you get very, very good papers that are very well referenced, very well written, and crucially hype-free. So that would be my 2 cents. Also, sit down with people who are, you know, this is what I do. I sit down and try and have coffee with people who are smarter than me and ask questions. And finally, listen to people you don't necessarily agree with. So this is more for podcasts. You know, you can be very excited about AI, then search out the people who are very critical of it, and vice versa. So that would be my 2 or 3 cents. Now, there's another question here. The panel mentioned governance. And it's in relation to third-party partners. How can we ensure that third parties adhere to our cyber ethics standards? Anyone?
There are plenty of existing frameworks that exist to monitor third parties, such as doing contractual audits over third parties, for example, obtaining attestations to industry standards, etc. If it's something that you're worried about, there are existing processes that should be able to cover that. It's just a new angle to look at and another thing to look at in those existing processes. Yeah, and I suppose it's also one thing in the last few years, regulators, and certainly the Bank of England, the PRA, but I think also in the US, basically they kind of woke up and said, well, everything is interconnected digitally. So that, because everything digitally moves very much faster, it introduces a lot of risk. So organizations have to think very carefully about the third parties they rely on. But as you said, Jamie, there are frameworks, there are standards, there is best practice to be followed. And then we have another question here. And I think this one is for Benny. Can you give examples on how biases can be introduced into algorithms and AI systems, specifically used in professional services, and what do we do about it? So rather long question, but over to you.
So I guess there's lots of ways data could be, so biases could be introduced. It could be the data that you're inputting into the model. So if you are including certain types of data into the model, that might get pulled out into outputs. Data quality could not be great, or it could also be interfered with. So you might see instances where incorrect or maybe biased data might be injected into a model. There are data tools that you might be able to use to avoid those biases, but also I think having data management practices built into the organization's governance is really important. So making sure that you're considering the types of data that are being used, but also being mindful of the fact that you're using confidential or private data, so being careful with that. And then I think the last thing that's quite important is to also review the output. So obviously the outputs that you get will be based on the data that's input into the model. So reviewing those outputs and then correcting that in terms of the data that's being used is also quite important.
Thank you. I think your point on reviewing the outputs is very, very important, because I've spoken to people who they audit the outputs, and a very, very good way of assuring yourself that a model doesn't discriminate unfairly is to feed it synthetic data, because computers can generate a lot of data very quickly. So instead of reviewing past results, real cases, which is absolutely part of the the audit and the oversight, you can also proactively reassure yourself that the model won't discriminate by basically running it many times with synthetic data. And one of the reasons people like this is because a lot of these models, especially the deep learning ones, are very messy and complicated, and very, if not impossible, to audit. So we're kind of forced to focus on the outputs, but let's not forget ultimately the outputs are what matter. Paul, I know you are experienced with models and AI and the technical and mathematical aspects of it. Do you have any ideas on the specific or more like the various methodologies that we can rely on to make sure that we correct for these biases?
So some of these are a bit esoteric, but I'll start with some really basic principles. Sometimes a good place to start is to fully understand the data that the model was trained on. And you're looking for things that weren't in that data set. You're looking for absences. A lot of the biases arise because there's too little data of a certain type in the data set, too few cases of an edge case, So for example, there may be a failure to represent ethnicity or gender or a whole host of other scenarios in the core data set that the model was trained on. If you want to, without just rooting through all of that data yourself, encourage builders of models to do things differently, you could do something like have a knowledge graph of all of the core training data, which is something that you can interrogate and ask simple questions of. So you could see, relative proportions of any kind of aspect or field of the data and how present it was. So you could find out how many people of a given ethnic origin were represented in a data set that is people's views or people's attributes or has a person dimension to it. So there are ways you can construct the data that is used for training such that it's interrogable, so that you can find edge cases or minimal amounts of data which are likely to be perhaps poorly represented in model outputs. But the people who made the model might have done something to try and deal with that problem and written in additional code or additional functionality to compensate, as Google did and got in trouble for quite recently. So you've got to supplement all of that with test case generation and running cases through the model. So you've got to envisage, what are all the things I'd be really upset about going wrong from an ethical or moral standpoint, and how many different scenarios that I can prompt for can I come up with or bits of data can I come up with that I feed into the model that will see whether or not I get a result I really don't want to have. It's almost back to the good old days of building any computer program. You know, it's about your testing regimen, because ultimately there's going to be a degree of opacity. You know, there's a lack of transparency in what the model really does and what it was really trained in to some degree. You can work at overcoming it much more than people pretend. You know, you can make things that generate images show you the image parts that built up to the final image and break it out at certain levels in, you know, the neural net in terms of the hidden layers. There's all sorts of stuff you can do, but ultimately you don't ever have full transparency. So you're pushed back to testing for the cases you're concerned about. And both the companies that generate and train applications and models should be doing that testing. And we should be doing some sense checking out in context ourselves if we're going to be heavy users of those models, or going to use them in areas that may be very sensitive for us, like, you know, recruitment, for example. If we use an AI-led recruitment system in a professional service firm or in a bank, we ought to be testing that for the things that we would be really worried about going wrong, that would have legal or reputational implications for us. And we should design those cases and run them through the model with artificial data.
Thank you. I think that's a point very well made in regards to looking at edge cases, outliers, but also absences in the data. I think, regrettably, that's all we have time for today. So thank you to all our panelists, Jamie, Paul, and Benny. And also thank you for the good questions from the audience and your attendance. Now, if you are watching this on playback on YouTube, please do subscribe to the Chartered Banker channel, and do share this content with your friends if you found it useful. So thank you to everyone, and I wish you a very good day. All right, goodbye.